Okay, great. Okay, real quick, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Ryan Oster. I am one of the members of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Training Program. I have what I consider to be the single best job in all of the world. I get to travel around this country and meet and greet and train folks who are all about and passionate about fish and wildlife conservation. Just like myself, I'm very passionate about that. So that is what the federal government pays me to do. I get to travel this great country and train folks about the various federal funds that are available and what the requirements are and the rules that come into play when you use it. So I'll be one of the presenters today. Really quickly, I want to hand it over to my good friend Silvana for her to introduce herself, because she's going to be co-presenting this webinar with me. So Silvana, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Silvana, and it's great to be here and to present with Ryan. I have been in trainings before with Ryan, and he is amazing. That makes me nervous because I don't like presentations. I like all the behind the scenes. So that's Ryan, but I'll try to not be nervous during my 5 minutes, Ryan.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks, Silvana. Okay, real quick before I hand it over to introduce some other folks, real quick, just want to talk about a few business rules about this webinar. I don't know how familiar everybody is using MS Teams. It's a similar platform to Zoom. A lot of people are familiar with that. But we just want to go over a couple business rules. First and foremost, you'll see I've got a slide up here highlighting the top right corner of your screen there. That's all your controls that you will have available to you. We would ask everybody except the presenters to please mute your microphones. We're going to have a lot of people on this call. We're trying to save bandwidth where we can and also to avoid distractions. So if you could please mute your microphone. And there are instructions on the screen how to do that. Also, you can your choice. You can leave your camera on. You can turn your camera off. It doesn't matter either way with us. We do feel like if you can turn your camera off, except when you're speaking, that'd be great. Maybe save a little bandwidth here and there. As far as questions, what we would respectfully ask is if we can, let's save all the questions. We're going to have about a 10-minute Q&A at the end of this hour webinar to answer folks' questions that they may have. So you can ask your questions one of two ways. At the end of the webinar, you can click that raise your hand icon and I'll see you've raised your hand and I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question then. Or during the presentation, you might not want to forget your question. There's the ability to enter your question in the chat. That's that icon second from the left. You can click that icon, open up the chat feature. You can type in your question in the heat of the moment if you think you might forget it. And then once we get to the end of the presentation, we'll circle back and we'll go through as many of those as we have within the allotted time. Short of that, the only other buttons I really want to point your attention to is the big red rectangular button on the right. Hopefully you don't hit that button before the end of the presentation. But if you have to leave the presentation early, you can click that red button and you will exit from the conference. The last button I really want to draw your attention to is the button to the left of that. It's a square box with an arrow pointing into it. We would ask, please do not press that button no matter what you do. That will steal control of the screen away from me. And really for the purpose of this presentation, I've got all the PowerPoint loaded up on my screen, so please just don't kick that button. Okay, with that, I would like to hand the mic over to Tony Wasley, who is representing the Afwa, which stands for the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Tony is the chair of the National Grants Committee. They factor it heavily in this MultiState Conservation Grant Program. They're part of the panel that reviews these applications. So I want to give Tony the microphone for a couple minutes to introduce himself and say anything that he wants to. So Tony, take it away. You might have to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Silvana. So as Ryan said, I'm Tony Wassley. I'm the director for the Nevada Department of Wildlife, also current vice president for the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which also places me into the role of the National Grants Committee chairmanship. I've been on that National Grants Committee, I believe, 7 years now. And let me back up just a second and say that President Sarah Parker Pauley sends her regrets for not being able to offer some comments and remarks today. She's in the middle of a presentation right now elsewhere, conflicted out, and so I'm happy to be here. I also wanted to take advantage of the opportunity and say that as a young biologist in my agency, and even as a new director, I knew very little about the MultiState Conservation Grant Program, and kind of being thrust into the throes of things as a committee member 7 years ago. I feel a lot more well versed on it, and as Ryan said, it's Afwa and the National Grants Committee plays a significant role in the administration under the watchful eye and authority of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And there's been quite an evolution in the process, and certainly growing interest. And the agenda today, Paul and Ryan and others will dive into some of the nuance of the program. And so I'm anxious to maybe learn more. I think just taking a second on the name of the program, MultiState, is really the important part of this program, where there's many issues that we all deal with, and we typically think about these issues within the boundaries of our states. And so the idea that we can come together, synergize not only the efforts but the benefits, it's much greater effort, emphasis. The benefits are more far-reaching, and the partnerships with which we can approach these problems are also enhanced when we do it through the association. We do it with regional associations. We do it with industry partners. It really broadens the approach, and actually the scoring criteria actually provides additional points for the size of the footprint, the footprint of the benefits, for example. So there's some great opportunity through the MultiState Conservation Grant Program, as I said, to partner with industry, to work through regional associations, to deal with emerging issues, whether it's wildlife health issues, some of the social science issues. And then one of the agenda items today will also be looking at the strategic priorities. And so there's a great opportunity for alignment with strategic priorities as identified, nationally as well as regionally. I was also, in looking through the agenda, I was also really happy to see that we're going to look at some of the examples of successful programs, because there are a number of them that we can point to, things that wouldn't likely otherwise have been accomplished, if it weren't for this unique opportunity to work at much larger scales than just the geopolitical boundaries within our states. So with that, Ryan, I think that'll conclude my comments and remarks. And again, Sarah sends her regrets, and I know many of you, and I would just ask that as we go through this presentation over the next hour, you look for opportunities and think about the far-reaching and broad-reaching benefits, not only through the partnerships that are created through this effort, but then the footprint of the benefits. So thank you, Ryan.
All right, thank you, Tony. Outstanding introduction. Okay, with that, I'd also like to give the opportunity for Paul Roush, who is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program Assistant Director. I'd like to give him the opportunity to welcome you all to this webinar and provide a few interesting comments. Paul, are you available?
Yes, Ryan. Appreciate that and appreciate the introduction, and thank you, Tony, for those remarks. I think you really hit it right on the head, and identified the real purpose behind this webinar, which is to really share information and expand the knowledge base around what the MultiState Conservation Program is all about. It has undergone a number of substantial changes in recent, in the very recent past, just in the last few years, from the standpoint of growing from a $6 million a year program to an $11 million a year program, and also really expanding the focus, I would say, on kind of the outreach, recruiting aspects. We often refer to that as R3, recruitment, retention, reactivation of anglers, hunters, sport shooters, and boaters. And it really put a renewed focus on, or a new focus on the wildlife side of things on that element. And one of the challenges we've faced in the conservation community is, as we look at trying to draw in new members into the hunting and sport shooting and angling and boating communities, we find we struggle oftentimes, I think, with reaching some of the underserved communities, and so we've made a concerted effort to do some outreach here and to try to engage with folks who may have some good ideas about how to do that. And that's really one of the purposes of this webinar, not just the general knowledge base for folks who are already actively engaged in conservation, which is valuable. As you heard Tony say, he has worked in this field his entire career, and still just kind of recently, as he's been thrust into the committee chair position, really learned more about this program. So I think it could be valuable to everybody. I want to thank Ryan and Silvana for kind of taking on the heavy lift here. And if you're new to the federal financial assistance grant world, some of what gets talked about today will seem overwhelming. We acknowledge that. We like, it seems like anything related to government, federal government in particular, is never easy, simple, and straightforward. But we want to try to make it as much that way as we possibly can, and certainly would not expect you to come out of this webinar as experts in the federal grant process. That's not what the purpose is, but we will share some resources with you if you are interested in pursuing opportunities here, and continue to offer support where we can. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your time today. We're excited that you took the time to listen to this today, and I will turn it back to Ryan and Silvana for their very informative presentation.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate that. All right, just bear with me a second here while I switch over my screens, and we'll jump right into the presentation here. Let's go to that. Okay. All right. Folks, again, thank you very much for attending this webinar. And as both Tony and Paul said, really the desire for this is to try to provide a high-level informational webinar, reaching out to possible new folks who might be interested in the system. So I know there's, going through that list of attendees, there's lots of names I recognize. There are folks who might even be frequent customers of the Fish and Wildlife Service and other federal grants. This presentation is going to be a little bit higher than that, but we certainly hope that you all appreciate it and everybody walks away with something. So let's get right into it. MultiState Conservation Grant Program. Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, folks, I have the best job in the world. I get to work with fish and wildlife agencies, other NGOs, folks who are passionate about conservation. And whenever I go out and I train these folks, I am proud to brag and talk about that the Wildlife Restoration Program and the Sport Fish Restoration Program, whether you have heard of those or not, we could creatively argue that these are possibly two of the most absolutely successful conservation grant programs that exist in history. Let me give you a little bit of number here. For example, in federal fiscal year, I'm talking federal government fiscal year 2020, those two programs, the Wildlife Restoration Program and the Sport Fish Restoration Program, provided just shy of, buckle yourself in, just shy of $1 billion, federal dollars, was provided just in these two mandatory programs to state fish and wildlife agencies for them to do the successful and amazing conservation of wild birds, mammals, sport fish, and the habitats that are critical to those animals throughout the U.S. $1 billion, that's no small chunk of change. And in addition, these two programs, they don't just fund fish and wildlife conservation. States use these monies to fund other activities. Some of these activities include hunter recruitment and recreational shooter recruitment programs. State Fish and Wildlife agencies use these monies to build boating access sites and recreational fishing sites. They use these monies to build public target ranges, and they use these monies for aquatic education resources and other recreational fishing programs. And this is just naming a few. So this money goes to a lot. It doesn't just go to on the ground conservation activities for wild birds and mammals and their habitats. Well, the multi-state program came about because in 2000, both the Wildlife Restoration Act and the Sportfish Restoration Act were amended by the Wildlife and Sportfish Restoration Programs Improvement Act. And this amendment came in and physically created the MultiState Conservation Grant Program. And you'll see we're going to acronym it MSCGP. And basically what the multi-state program did was it authorized the Secretary of the Interior in 2000 to make available annually up to $6 million, $3 million from the wildlife restoration side and $3 million from the sportfish restoration side, pull that money and create and fund multi-state conservation grant programs. So since 2000, the traditional multi-state conservation grant program has been in existence and has been an amazing program to achieve conservation and other activities. Most recently, back on December 20th, 2019, President Trump signed into law what was called the Modernizing the Pittman-Robertson Fund for Tomorrow's Needs Act. And this further amended the Wildlife Restoration Act to create what I like to call a two-pronged now multi-state conservation grant program. We have the traditional multi-state conservation grant program, which is $6 million. It's been in existence since 2000. But now, ever since that amendment in 2019, it authorized and created a secondary multi-state conservation grant program called the R3, or if you will, the Hunter Recruitment and Recreational Shooter Recruitment Multi-State Conservation Grant Program. And this now has up to $5 million that is available annually that is specific for what we call R3 types of grants. And these are grants that promote a national hunting and shooting sports recruitment program. So let's talk about, why did Congress create the Multi-State Conservation Grant Program? Well, it was authorized to provide fundings, and Tony hit it on all this, to provide funding to address regional and perhaps national level priorities of the state fish and wildlife agencies that are perhaps too grandiose a scale or too big, or that a single state doesn't have the capacity to implement and complete them on their own with their available resources or their capacity. So it is a unique financial assistance program in that not only does the Fish and Wildlife Service administer this program, but we jointly administer this program in cooperation with our fine partners, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And I'm going to abbreviate them AFWA, AFWA. So let's talk a little bit about that joint administration. How do both these entities administer it? Well, every year the service, I'm a Fish and Wildlife employee, we publish an annual notice of funding opportunity, and we set various important dates in partnership with AFWA. AFWA, their part in this is they help manage and they conduct reviews of applications, and they ultimately submit what we call a priority list of projects to the Fish and Wildlife Service that they recommend for funding. Once we receive that list, the service, then we ultimately end up issuing the grant awards. We obligate money. We make the funding available to those entities that got successful applications approved. And then we also manage the grant awards, and we also help to close out the completed projects. So that's how we jointly administer this program. Went the wrong way there. Sorry about that. All right, let's talk about where does the money come from. So here's a visual diagram. Let's first talk about where does the money come from in the Wildlife Restoration Act. If you're not familiar with the Wildlife Restoration Act, it's an amazing act. The Wildlife Restoration Trust Fund receives revenue from manufacturer-paid excise taxes on certain items. These items include, as you can see on the screen, an 11% excise tax on certain firearms and ammunitions, a 10% excise tax on certain pistols, revolvers, and handguns, and then lastly, an 11% excise tax on bows and other archery equipment.
This past year.
Yeah, and now it's going to go to zero.
Okay. And just remind everybody, if you could mute yourself real quick, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, if you don't mind. Thank you. So these taxes are collected every year and they're deposited into the trust fund. Okay. At the end of the year, we see where these deductions go, and you'll see I've highlighted on the screen there. Well, the traditional multi-state program, like I mentioned, it receives $3 million. It gets deducted from the trust fund, and that money is dedicated to the traditional multi-state conservation grant program. The $3 million that's taken out of the trust fund comes out of the total amount of taxes that are collected and deposited into the trust fund from the previous year. You'll see the next area I've highlighted is that R3 now multi-state conservation grant program, and you'll see we deduct from the trust fund $5 million annually out of that trust fund to implement the R3 program. And it's important to note that the $5 million that's dedicated to the R3 program isn't coming from all of the revenues that come out of the trust fund. It specifically only comes from the money, the taxes, excuse me, collected on bows, quivers, broadheads, arrows, and points. Okay. When we go over to the sport fish side, you'll see just like wildlife restoration, but with different excise taxes, it's an excise tax program. It receives excise taxes annually from manufactured excise taxes on electric motors, fishing equipment, tackle, import duties on yachts and tackle. Most importantly, the trust fund also receives a significant amount of revenue from that portion of the federal fuels tax that is directly attributable to motorboat fuel usage and small engine gas usage. Really important to know about this, revenues from motorboat fuels and small engine fuel taxes have historically provided up to and in excess of over 70% of the total amount of money that goes into the sport, fish restoration, and boating trust fund. So that's a very significant contributor to the trust fund. Just like the wildlife restoration program, every year we deduct money out of there, and it goes several different areas, as you can see on the screen. The one area why we're all here today is, remember, the traditional multi-state conservation grant program gets $3 million both from the wildlife side and the sport fish side. So that's where you see it here. It highlighted, that's the $3 million that comes over from the sport fish restoration and boating trust fund. All right, so let's talk about it. We've got a multi-state program that basically branches out into two sub-multi-state programs, and you'll see it on the screen there. So the traditional multi-state conservation grant program provides funding for traditional wildlife and fisheries conservation activities, and you'll see the bullet points there. So if you're interested in this program and you've got a project idea that has to do with wildlife and sport fish management, conservation research, you got a project that deals with boating access development, hunter education, R3, or fish and wildlife habitat, you're going to be applying to the traditional side of this coin, the traditional multi-state program. President Trump signed into law the new multi-state program, the R3, and you'll see that this is more unique. This is more laser focused. The R3 $5 million is dedicated for what we call hunter recruitment and recreational shooter recruitment projects. And basically, if you will, these are projects that basically seek to recruit, retain, or reactivate hunters and recreational shooters. And the amendment that created this act provided some additional guidance about what these types of activities could include. I'm just going to read it to you. It also includes outreach activities. So maybe you've got a project that has to do with communicating with hunters or recreational shooters or the public with respect to hunting and recreational shooting opportunities. This program can also fund opportunities to reduce barriers for the participation in hunting and recreational shooting. This program also provides funding to educate, mentor, and do field demonstrations. And this program also provides funding to enhance access to hunting and recreational shooting, including through range construction and development. So there's a lot of broad diversity that eligible projects could focus on and be eligible for funding under this. But I do want to point out one important thing, and Silvana is going to speak to this here shortly, is that all proposals, no matter what they fit under, traditional or R3, you've got to speak to how your eligible activities address the activities listed in one or more of Afwa's selected strategic priority areas. And Silvana's going to talk to you about what exactly those are here shortly. Okay, whenever you're interested in applying for funding, it's important to know, are you eligible for funding? So you'll see on the list, this is who is eligible to apply for these grant program funds every year. So if you're a state, you're eligible to apply, or groups of states can combine and apply for these. Additionally, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and states can apply and use this funding if they're carrying out the purposes of the National Survey on Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation that happens every 5 years. And then lastly, many of you on this call, you're gonna find yourself in that third bullet. This eligible applicants also include what we call non-governmental organizations, to include entities like nonprofit organizations, public and private universities or institutions of higher education. So it is a broad group of folks who are eligible to apply for this funding. Eligible projects, in order for them to be considered for funding, there's three criteria that they have to meet, and that is projects must benefit at least one of three things. One, your project has to benefit at least 26 states. So it has to have sort of some national component aspect to it that it would benefit at least 26 states. Or your project must benefit a majority of states that are located in a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service region. You might be wondering what those regions are, and that is the graphic that I have up on the slide there. This is how the service breaks out its service regions. So you could basically, if you're not located in Kentucky like I am, you can find where you're located, and if your project can benefit a majority of states in the region that you live in, you are good to go and your project is up for consideration. Lastly, in order to be eligible, you could also submit it that it would benefit a majority of states in what is called the Afwa regions. And the Afwa regions, I've switched slides now. These are the Afwa regions. They're basically four regions. We have a WAFWA region, which is a Western Association of Fish and Wildlife, Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, MAFWA. We have the NEAFWA, Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And then lastly, we have the SEFWA, Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So those are the different criteria that you have to meet. We also want to remind folks that by statute, it's written into the code, the U.S. code, in order, if your project makes it past the initial proposal phase, which Silvana will talk about, in your full proposal, you must, this is required by statute, there must be a certification statement in your proposal, and that certification is provided up on the screen here. It's basically your organization must certify and assert to the fact that you will not use any of these grant funds for any activity that promotes or encourages opposition to the regulated hunting or trapping and the regulated taking of fish or recreational shooting activities. So very important, make certain your proposal has that statement in there. Before I hand it off to Silvana here real quick, I just want to give folks a little quick idea about MultiState Grant Program awards. Typically, grants range anywhere from $100,000 up to $1 million, which with the average approved grant being about $350,000. This is 100% federal funding, folks. There's no match requirement, so you don't have to bring any money to the table. 100% federal funding. Typically, grants will start at the beginning of every calendar. So if you're interested in applying for funding this year, you're going to generally shoot for having a start date of January 1 of next year. And on the screen, you'll see that traditionally, the program funds anywhere from 30 to 40 grants in the traditional side every year. And the R3 program is still relatively new, but we're averaging about 10 to 15 grants there. Really quickly, I've just put up a couple titles of some past approved grants so you can kind of see some examples. We don't have the luxury to go into the great successes that these projects have done, but we've approved past projects like in-stream flow and water level training and research. measuring the efficacy of state R3 recruitment, retention, and reactivation efforts. We've seen efforts to expand community support for the Fish Habitat and Partnership Program. We funded projects to look at meeting demand by how can we build more shooting ranges. There's a massive demand for more shooting ranges out there. This is a really interesting project that I'm interested in. How do we see hunter education happening and evolving in a post-COVID-19 world? And then lastly, how do we try to retain this massive surge that many and most state fish and wildlife agencies saw this year, last year with COVID? They saw a huge surge in the number of sport fishing licenses sold because that was one program that you could participate in effectively and social distancing. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over now to Silvana. I did go a little bit long, but we're still on perfect pace. Silvana, do you want to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about strategic priorities?
Yep, I'm here. So Ryan, I'll take you back to your time. Don't worry.
Okay.
So again, I'm the program manager for the MiltState Conservation Grants Program at the association. And I manage the process, and I am in a constant communication with the Fish and Wildlife Service, with our applicants, as well as the National Grants Committee and the technical review teams. So a little bit about the strategic priorities. So to be eligible for the MultiState grants, a project must address one of the strategic priorities that the association establishes and reviews annually. These priorities you're looking at right now, these are the 2021. We review them every year. These are new, and if you applied before for the MultiState grants, we used to have national conservation needs. That changed last year, and now we have the strategic priorities. So these priorities were established last year and were drafted based on the association's new strategic plan, the results of state science priorities survey, and the R3 priorities were created by the National R3 Implementation Work Group. So last year, we had discussions and input from the state leaders, the NGOs, the industry, and other partners prior to the approval of those priorities at the executive committee and by the full membership. You can move to the next slide, Ryan. So this is a timeline and what it looks like. And in the next slides, I'm just gonna talk into about each steps in details. Okay, Ryan. So the first phase is the strategic priorities. We review those during January, February, and once the notice of the funding opportunities, NOFO, and Ryan will talk a little bit more about those in the next slides, is published, Afwa sends out a request for the initial proposals through its communication channels. And what are these channels? We have the Afwa website where the guidelines and the information on the MultiState grants are posted. Also, we include that in the director lines that goes out monthly. And also we send the emails and requests for initial proposals to the Afwa committees and to the regional association committees. All the applications must be submitted in the Afwa portal. This makes it easier for the reviewers to have access and to review the initial proposals. The reviewers are given 3 to 4 weeks to evaluate the proposals and give feedback. And then each technical review team meets virtually to discuss the initial proposals and recommend the proposals that will move to the next phase. Okay, Ryan. So at the end of June and beginning of July, the successful applicants are invited to submit the full grant proposals. The email is sent to the applicants, and that includes the recommendations from the technical review teams. Also, we send the emails to the applicants that don't make it, and we include we include the feedback from the technical review teams as well. End of July, the full grant proposals are due, and they must be submitted in Afwa MultiState Grants portal and also in the Grant Solutions or grants.gov. Now, I know it's quite a deal to submit twice. There is a reason for that. We submit through the Afwa because the technical review teams need access to those grants for the evaluation, and we have to submit at Grant Solutions because it's a requirement. Now, the technical review teams again gets like 3 to 4 weeks to review the full grant proposals, and after the technical review teams is done with recommendations, Afwa staff compiles a draft priority list and a summary of the proposals with the recommendations for the technical review teams for the National Grant Committee. Next, Ryan. In September, the National Grants Committee will meet at Afwa annual meeting to discuss and establish the priority list, which must be approved by the majority of state directors during the business meeting. The successful and unsuccessful applicants are notified during those, including those who need to make changes. And of course, there will be changes. There are changes in the budget. Sometimes there are changes in the objectives, but in order to make those changes in Grant Solutions, the applicants will have to work with Fish and Wildlife Service. In October, the priority list is sent to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and after that, the grants approval process is up to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and Ryan will talk about those in details. Next slide, Ryan. And you heard me mentioning the National Grants Committee and the Technical Review Team. We make sure that all the regions are represented in the National Grants Committee, as you can see. We do not publish the list of the members in our website or anywhere else. We also ask the members to commit at least 2 years. The chair and the vice chair will rotate every year, but they will still serve for at least 2 years. You just heard Tony. Tony has been in that committee for longer than I have been working for Afwa when I started in 2015. And then the technical review teams, they are all volunteers and represent the states, federal agencies, nonprofits, industry, university, and other partners. They represent the organizations that are members of Afwa committees. And then just before I end with my slides, I really want to take a moment and thank you all of them, because they do an amazing job and put like many hours to make this program a success and really helped me a lot. And I see few of them are attending today, and it's great to see them all. Thank you, Ryan.
All right, thanks, Silvana. That was outstanding. I'm going to take control back of the screen here, and we'll finish this up. So real quick, let's. This is the part of the job I don't always enjoy. You know, as Paul mentioned, unfortunately, applying for federal funds is not a great box of chocolates. A lot of times, there is unfortunately challenges that have to happen, but there are reasons why. There are requirements, there are statutes that have to be followed. In training, we use this a lot. There's no such thing as a free meal. There's always strings that comes attached every time you get involved with the federal government. So we just felt it would be disingenuous of us to present this great information about this great program and available money out there. We just want to make you aware of what some of the other things that have to happen and you should be aware of if this is indeed a program that you want to apply for funding for. So please don't let any of this information scare you off. As Paul mentioned, we're here to help. We're here to walk you through this, and we'll have some contact information at the end of this presentation. If you're interested, we can talk more about some of these things, but let's talk about a couple of them. One, WSFR is required by federal regulations every year to publish what is called a notice of funding opportunity. And this notice of funding opportunity talks about, hey, here's this multi-state program. We've got up to $11 million available in it. And what are the rules? What's required to apply for it? That's what the notice of funding opportunity is. It also sets a lot of important information like deadlines that things have to be submitted by. So, for example, the MultiState Conservation Grant Program, NOFO, the service hopes to publish that, by March 18th of 2021. And so if we publish that, that would be for fiscal year 2022 funding. So look for us to publish that notice of funding opportunity. And where will you go find it? You'll go find it in one of two places, actually three places. You'll go find it out on a website called www.grants.gov. You can go to that website and search for MultiState Conservation Grant Program, and you should be able to navigate to the notice of funding opportunity. You'll also be able to find it for those folks who are registered in Grant Solutions. I'll talk about what Grant Solutions is here in just a moment. And then the third place is you'll also be able to find information about that notice of funding opportunity on the Afwa website. Another important information for you to be aware about is if you decide you want to apply for this funding, May 17, 2021. That's roughly the timeline that you're going to have your initial proposal submitted to Afwa by. So that kind of gives you an idea. What are we, about a little less than 3 months away from that. So that's kind of your timeline. That's the timeline for initial proposals. And then roughly our full proposals, if you're selected for a full proposal, roughly we're looking at a window of those deadlines due to both Afwa and the service around July 20, 2021. So important that the notice of funding opportunity be aware of that. All right, let's talk about something else. Additionally, when you apply for federal funds, unfortunately, federal law mandates that before you apply for federal funds, entities who do so, before you apply for federal grant funds, you have to have what is called a unique entity identifier, a UEI. What is that? Well, basically, this is a requirement. It's a 9-digit number that verifies the existence of your organization as a business entity worldwide, is basically what it is. UEIs currently are provided by an entity that is called Dun & Bradstreet. We often hear people abbreviate it called DUNS. And you can obtain a DUNS number completely free of charge. We've got information up there on the screen. You can get it by going to DUNS website. And this is rather simple and easy to do. Oftentimes your DUNS number is issued as rapidly as 1 to 2 days, as long as you do it through the online portal. It's important to note that DUNS in the coming year is going to be transitioning away from DUNS, and the unique entity identifier is going to be issued by another entity, but that's probably not coming into play until 2022 is what we're hearing right now. So again, you'll have to obtain what's called a unique entity identifier, and we can talk more about that later if you have questions. Once you get your unique entity identifier, you now have to also go into a system and register in what is called the System for Award Management. SAM, as we abbreviate it, is basically a federal repository that houses information about applicants and recipients who want to do direct business with the federal government. So unless you are waived from a SAM requirement, and probably not many folks on this call would qualify for a waiver, but you must be registered in SAM prior to you submitting a formal application for federal funding to a federal agency. So you've got to have that SAM registration active by the time you submit your full proposal application. If you let your SAM registration expire at any point during this, Fish and Wildlife cannot make any more financial obligations to any of your approved grants. This is a repository that we go into and we check. There are unfortunately nobody on this call, but there are some bad business entities out there that the federal government does not want to do business with anymore. By registering in SAM, this is one of many ways by which the federal government verifies and checks, are you a good business entity to do business with, or possibly, we hope, are you a bad entity to do business with? One of the most important things about grant funding is getting your money. So just want to inform folks who aren't familiar with, you get an approved award. A check does not, unfortunately, just show up in the mail, a blank check for the total amount of your awards. That's not how it works. You get your money by registering and enrolling through what is called ASAP. It's the Automated Standard Application for Payments. And if you've never enrolled in ASAP or have never been enrolled in ASAP under a service grant, WISFR, if you get an approved grant, will facilitate your organization's enrollment. We will initiate that by completing an ASAP enrollment form. We'll submit that to ASAP. Once they process it, they will then contact you back, your organization back, and contact your point of contact to upload your organization's banking account information. ASAP's a really quick, sweet little system, folks. Just so you know, once you're enrolled and everything's there, you just go into ASAP. You don't have to send us a bill for your payments. You go into ASAP and you say, hey, I'm ready to receive $50,000. I've got $50,000 in eligible expenditures that I want to get paid for. So you don't actually send any invoice to us. You just go directly into ASAP and request your funds drawdown that way. And we, the service, we monitor your drawdowns from ASAP as part of our monitoring of your award. I do just want to make quick note, folks, you should understand that you aren't supposed to go into ASAP on day one of your grant and draw down all the funds. You're only supposed to draw down the funds as you incur expenditures. Okay, running a little long, so I'm going to speed up through these last couple ones. We talked about grant solutions, folks. The Fish and Wildlife Service adopted grant solutions in May 2020 as our official grants management financial system. So if you apply, if you get approved for a full grant proposal, you will be required to register in Grant Solutions, and you have to do that in order for you to apply for your full grant proposal, as well as if you get approved, you will manage your grant in Grant Solutions. And we've got information on the screen right there. You'll see there's a link. Click here. If you're not registered in Grant Solutions, there's a form that you can fill out for recipients to request access. It's a role-based system, folks. Applicants, you can assign various staff different roles in the system. There's up to 5 different roles for recipients. If you're curious about what each of those roles is, contact us after the webinar. We can walk you through those. Something else you'll need to be aware of: if you get an approved grant, you will receive a notice of award through Grant Solutions. And what is the notice of award? Well, that's the legally binding instrument between your organization and the Fish and Wildlife Service that you have received an approved grant, and it sets the terms and conditions of the award. Basically, you agree that you're going to do X, and if you do that, the service, we will pay you Y, is in a high nutshell. So you'll eligible and approved applicants, you'll get that notice of award. We encourage you to read it. It's got a lot of important information on it about what your grant award number is, what's the start and end dates of your grant, how many federal dollars you've been awarded and are eligible to get. And it will also have some terms and conditions and when reports are due. Something else you'll find yourself bound to is recipients of multi-state grants. There are terms and conditions that come with every federal award, and one of the terms and conditions most likely you'll find yourself bound to is this great New York Times bestseller called 2 CFR 200, the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for all federal awards. Basically, it's broken down into 5 parts. You can see them on the screen right there. Some really important ones are subparts D and E, which speak to, subpart D speaks to specific requirements that you as a recipient will comply with when receiving federal awards. These are things like if you have to buy equipment or supplies, there are some requirements that come into play on that. There's record retentions. And then most importantly, there's subpart E, the cost principles that talk about what costs can and cannot be charged to the grant award. I use that picture on the screen often in a lot of my trainings is you can't just charge the federal government anything. It's got to be a cost that's necessary and reasonable, and it's designed to help protect the federal government from perhaps paying $644 for a washer or whatever that is up there on the screen. Last couple last slides, and then we'll get to the Q&A. you should be aware that if you received an approved award, there's going to be some reports that you're going to owe the service as a form of monitoring that we can check in on you every so often to see how is the grant coming, how are you doing at meeting the objectives of your grant. These will be outlined in the terms and conditions of your notice of award. And at a minimum, if it's a one-year award, you're at least going to owe us one final performance report at the end of the grant, and you're going to owe us one final financial report at the end of the grant. We've got a link on there to a great online training video that walks you through how to complete the SF425, which is the federal financial report. And folks, you will submit both of these forms directly in Grant Solutions when you received an approved award. So just note that you're going to owe us some reports as a way for us to monitor and for you to describe to us the great things you've accomplished in your approved award. With that, I think we're about good. We're about at the Q&A session here. So I just want to really quick point out, we do have some available resources to you. Everybody who's on this webinar is going to get a copy of this presentation, so you'll be able to directly access these links once you have the PowerPoint. But we have some great quick reference training aids on both programs out on the web. You can click a link to get to those. Afwa's MultiState website is fantastic. It's super. Silvana, if you're doing it, keep it up. You're doing a great job on it. Lots of great information on that website. And then I do want to point you to two really great contacts. One is Silvana. You met her on this call today. We've got her email address up there if you want to contact her, if you have questions about the Afwa process. On our side with the service, the national lead for the MultiState program is Mr. John Strempel. I believe he's on this call as well. You've got his email address up there. Please feel free to contact him if you have any questions about the MultiState program and applications. If you get an approved award, you're definitely going to get to know John because he'll be the one walking you through things and managing and monitoring the award with you. And then lastly, I have my contact up there. I am a federal financial assistance trainer. If you have any questions about broader financial assistance, please feel free to email me at any time. And with that, we ran, I don't know, 5 minutes long, but that's not so bad. I guess we'd like to open it up now to anybody who might have any questions. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to pop open the chat here real quick and see if there's anything in here. I see we have one chat here that says, let's see. Let me go to the start. Will we need to apply for a new unique identifier, or will our current DUNS roll over? That was from Jennifer. Jennifer, if you have a current DUNS number right now, that you are good. You've got a unique entity identifier. You are good to go. So no need to go out and get another one. I hope that answers your question. Christy says if your DUNS number will need to be active. So if you already have an active number, you should be able to use it. Yep. Following along with that. Thank you, Christy. We've got a question from Rich. Will a copy of the slides be made available? Yes, I'm going to send everybody after this webinar a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. And we are also, a reminder, recording this webinar. Once we post that webinar on a public site, we will get that information to everybody, and you can share that with folks who weren't able to attend. Okay. Jennifer asked, have the 2021 grants been funded yet? John, are you on the call? I think you're the best one to answer that. My belief is no, you're still working on them, but I think you'd be the best source. Can you pop in?
Yes, sure. We're working on those now. We've had a lot of amendments from the FY 2020 series, awards. Actually, there were 25 of the modern ones from or R3s from 2020, and they were later, in the process, and because it's a brand new cycle. So we were actually awarding those last fall. And then we had 39 traditionals that were awarded back in March, April or February of 2020. So we now have about 21 traditionals. We've got 17 R3s for 2021 and about 21 traditionals that we're working on right now. So I've got some regional help, and we're just moving along as best we can.
Right. Okay. Thanks, John. If I could ask you to maybe hang on, I see one more question further down I might need you to answer. Let's see, we've got Samantha Petter says, folks, if you're interested, there's some great previous multi-state conservation grant program projects, and she's providing a link to that. Thank you very much, Samantha. That is a great resource to go to. If you want to see what some previously funded projects were, maybe to help you refine your activity. John, here's a question, I guess, for you or Silvana. So I made a comment that traditional grants in the multi-state program range from a minimum of $100,000 up to $1 million. The question is, can we approve projects less than that? Could a grant be $20,000?
We have done it, Ryan. It's just like we prefer to not like give $125,000 grants rather than bigger grants that have bigger impact as well. But there are grants that don't require as much funding, and we have done that, 1 or 2 grants per cycle.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Great. So I hope that answers your question, Janice. Yes, it's possible. But just again, remember that you are competing for these funds with other entities, and there is a finite amount of money. So Afwa and the service, we're trying to get the most bang for the buck that we can with these limited dollars.
Ryan, you have a hand up with 4Ws Outdoors.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Bob. Let's kick over there. We've got a couple more questions, but let me go. We go back. Okay. So I'm going to give the opportunity 4Ws Outdoors. Go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask away.
All right. So I'm just checking in on diversity in the grants. I'm applying for the grant, reaching a diverse group of outdoor people, anglers, fishermen, hunters, shooters. It's traditionally an underserved community. You don't get to see it. I do that every day, but looking in to see how important that is and get it awarded a grant, focusing a lot of attention on women and diversity.
John, Sivan, do you want that, or do you want me to take that?
You can take that.
Okay, John. I think that's definitely the intent. If we go back, let me see if I can scroll back to what some of the. Sorry for your eyes here. Okay. So you'll see. So here we go. We've got some of the stuff here. There is definitely, recruitment. You'll see they're on the traditional multi-state side. I assume 4Ws. Are you talking about fishing or hunting recruitment?
Well, we're outdoor brand, so we do fishing, water safety, and hunting.
Okay.
Shooting sport. So we cover quite a bit of ground.
Okay,
And,
so I think you would have 2 pots. You could apply to both. Is the aquatic side would fall more under what's labeled as the traditional multi-state, and to me it's right here under aquatic R3 programs. Okay.
Okay.
In terms of if you wanted to submit a project that was focusing more on shooters or hunters, then you might find yourself over here applying for R3. And Silvana, could they combine that in one grant?
Yeah, so if there is an R3 program that you can, if you're confused which priority it's addressing, then you would have to choose the R3 priority, the 5th one, if you remember from that slide. But the money, the funding are going to come from 2 different pots, because for the sport fishing, we cannot get the money from the R3, from the PR. So it will address the R3 priority, but the funding will come from 2 different areas, from 2 different pots. So yes, and I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, that's where I can put in for recreational boating. I do quite a bit of that, and then all the way to shooting sports to hunting in a pretty diverse market.
Yeah, I think that you're definitely that's definitely what we're here for. I just want to remember, to be eligible, you've got to tie your project to having a benefit to multiple states or to more than 50% of a state in the service region or the Afwa region. So just make certain it's creative grant writing, right? It's all in how you write that grant. How do you sell it? just make certain that your activities, you write how that your activities by doing this has a regional or national scale or scope to it.
Okay, we're in Region 2, and we're working with the region and directors now. So.
Okay, great. Okay.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add, like, for the traditional funds, I mean, there are projects that come in that have like a wildlife aspect and a sportfish aspect. So those projects can be certainly funded 50% from each fund. Sometimes they're even 75%, 25, so or 100% from either side. So there is some room to work with that, from the different funds, depending on what the activities are for the traditional side.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, John. Okay, folks, I see we're at our ended time, but I'm willing to stay online and go through a couple more of these questions. Silvana, John, are you able to stick around a little bit?
Yeah, Ryan,
Yes,
there
sir.
are a few there that I can like tackle pretty quick.
Okay, well, let me go down the list so I don't miss anybody here. So I've got the next one here is from Lydia. Says, for the criteria, do we have to fit all three or just one of the three? So Silvana, do you want to take that?
Yeah, Lydia is talking about the eligibility criteria, I think, and it's one of them. It's 26 states or 50% of Afwa region or 50% of the other regions.
Yeah.
So one of the criterias.
Yeah. Yep. You got it. Okay, great. Back, we got a comment here from 4Ws again, promoting the outdoors to a diverse community. Yeah, I think we talked about that. That's definitely an eligible project. Again, I'll just got to write it up and make certain and sell it to meet the criteria and fit the Afwa strategic priorities. Silvana, that was your answer to Lydia, so we're good to go there.
I have one more comment for Lydia's
Okay.
question here. So if the projects are different, the applicants, one organization can submit more than one application. So let's be clear on that. Now, if the project is, the grant is addressing both fish and wildlife, we already gave an answer for that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Lydia, you had a question. Can we apply to both the traditional multi-state conservation grant program and R3 program, or can you just apply to one? Silvana, do you want to take that?
Oh, I just answered that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So yeah, the answer is yeah. You can apply to both, and you can apply multiple times to one program. If you have multiple ideas, that you can apply multiple times. So good deal. Okay. Janice, reading your comment, we've addressed that. Okay. Let's see. Samantha's got the smaller markets. Okay, good there. Lydia says, Silvana mentioned the Afwa portal. Is that where we apply on the Afwa websites?
The portal is different from the Afwa website where all the information is. When I post the information in the Afwa website, the link to the portal will be there. If you are a new applicant, you have to create a username, and then you will be there. That your information will be there for the rest of whenever you want to apply again.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and Lydia, I just scrolled to the PowerPoint. I hope I'm not getting people dizzy with my scrolling here, but this link you'll see, and again, you're going to get this PowerPoint. That link will get you to the MultiState website on Afwa, and then there's all that information on how to get to the portal from there. So Silvana will take care of you definitely with that. So check out that link right there. It'll get you directly to Afwa's MultiState Conservation Grant Program page. Okay, good deal. Let's see, I've got a question from Alyssa. The category traditional multi-state conservation grant program, wildlife and fish habitat, does that need to be focused on game species? John, Silvana, I'll give you guys the opportunity.
I'll let John.
Well, go ahead. Yeah, it's basically the game, whatever the states, have on their list of game species. That's really what it's focusing on. It's possible you could have a project that maybe is maybe focusing on some of the prey of an important game species. So you'd have to sort of see what it says. You know we'd have to sort of see what the idea would be. You know, for a particular project like that. You know, but it focuses generally on the game species.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John. Yeah. Folks, I think that's it. We've got, again, we're 5 minutes over. I do apologize about that, but any other questions that folks might have? Give it another couple seconds.
I just want to say, please email me if you have any questions. This was like really short for covering so much, and it's so many questions out there, and I'm usually good at responding right away.
Great. Okay. Okay, so I see one other one came in. I have a question, but you can email it. Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, folks, thank you so much. We do realize this was a burst, maybe drinking from a water hose, but you know, you only have an hour. It's really, you can barely scratch the surface of the MultiState program. But please, we're here to help. We want to encourage people to apply to this program. You have Silvana's contact, you have John's contact, you have my contact. Please feel free to reach out to us. And if you are interested, we hope you're interested. Look for those notice of funding opportunities to be published, you know, within the next month. Go out to grants.gov, or if you're already registered in Grant Solution, you should be able to go into Grant Solutions and search directly there. Check out the Afwa website. This is a great conservation program, and it's only great because of the great proposals that get submitted by you all that we get the pleasure of funding. So let's keep up the great work. And this is all about conservation for fish and wildlife and recruiting and retaining new hunters and anglers and recreational shooters. So with that, Silvana, if you want to add anything? No? Okay. All right. Well, folks, we'll end the meeting here. I'll end it and look for an email from me with the PowerPoint presentation next day or so. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. Savannah.
Thank you, John.
Goodbye.